Oh, this is gonna be fun. I got to tell you, like we're coming up to the retreat, and I am feeling just downright relaxed, like to the point where I'm walking into these episodes really with almost no idea of what we're going to talk about or where it's going to go, and I'm okay with that, which is really weird for somebody who comes from like some serious social anxiety and some alcoholism and all kinds of escapism and everything else to just be able to walk into this and frankly just not really care how you take it, because I know my intention is just to be out open and honest and vulnerable and all that fun stuff. It's just it still gets me, I gotta say. Like it really does. It brings a tear to my eye from time to time when I see the gap from where I was to where I am, and I don't even know what's to come. And the reason I guess I'm saying this is because I had a conversation earlier today with somebody who goes in and out of bouts of alcoholism, and recently went back into a little bit of one, and it only lasted for a few days. They caught themselves. They decided, well, I'm going to admit myself to a hospital for a few weeks so I can get the space I need to really kick this. And it's so important when you come to that point to recognize how much progress you've made, because one, you caught it before it ruined years of your life, months of your life, weeks of your life, anything but a few days. And you've decided to give yourself the space to think about the things that obviously you've been thinking about, to get away from the stresses and allow yourself to actually have that space to change the way that you want to change without everything pushing and pulling you. And in that way, I compared it a lot to our retreats. It's just a space for you to practice everything that you're already practicing, but with less interference. So don't beat yourself up, even when you feel defeated, even when you feel like you're backsliding. If you caught the fact that you're backsliding, or that if you caught the fact that you perceive yourself to be backsliding, that's all progress. Give yourself a little pat on the back for that shit, because it's important. It will keep you going.
Yeah, it's definitely super important to keep that in mind as you go. It's so funny just how, I don't know, how used to a certain bar you set for yourself you get. Because a handful of years ago, even doing this stuff, like live streaming as often as I do, being on podcasts as often as I am, doing whatever it may be, I would have a ton of anxiety going into any of these. And beyond that, there are times, and one of my biggest fears with all this stuff was like freezing up, forgetting what I'm saying, stuff like that. Because I've had some situations in my life where that's happened, and it fucking sucked because it was like in front of a bunch of people, and it traumatized me in a way. And so now that still happens, which I think is one of the funniest parts. Like there was on yesterday's episode, and Ray does an amazing job of clipping the episode. So when there is a bunch of blank space, you don't see it as much unless it's a raw, and then it's fucking raw. There's no clipping whatsoever, and that makes it a lot more fun, I think. Just that people are able to see that from time to time. But in yesterday's episode, I was going on a thought train, and halfway through I was just like, I have no idea. Oh, it was about this. And then I was like, nope, not that. And I was like, come back, come back, come back. And then it just like wasn't there. It was just completely gone. A few years ago, I would have not been able to let that go. I would have mulled over it. I would have been like, oh my God, what if it happens again? What if it happens so much that I can't even say anything anymore? What if it goes so far that I'm not even able to continue to function? Like that's where my mind would take it to absolute extreme hypothetical situations. And sometimes I forget that was very much at the forefront of my reality. And now the same shit happens. It's like, and Ray's like, I had something else I wanted to add. And I was like, yeah, go for it. And I'll just kind of smile it off. And then something, either that comes back or it doesn't, or something else comes to mind. And it's just like, it's gone like that. And it doesn't impact me for the rest of the time. And it's that. So it's not so much about avoiding those types of situations. It's just about recognizing that they don't mean anything about you, that you'll be perfectly fine if/when you inevitably go through those things, but you can spend your whole life trying to avoid those things, and it becomes paralyzing. And then you build it up on this massive sort of mountain, like, I can't let that happen. And so you're always aware of it, and you're never really able to free yourself from that. You're never able to be free or speak freely or start a sentence without having any fucking idea of where it's going to go. Like I do pretty much every time I open my mouth on any of these calls. It's like maybe there's a couple thoughts or a couple words that I'm like, ooh, I like that. Oh, I'm going to take this here. Don't know where, but in this general direction. And then you just go with it because there isn't so much concern for what anything means about you because you know none of it does. And without that concern, you're willing to speak freely, to be free in and of yourself. So all that said, just take the time to keep that in mind as you go, that you've made a lot of progress no matter what. And someone who we have seen progress in front of our eyes, who is a fantastic Patreon member, community member of Dualistic Unity, one of our moderators on Discord, Mark. He's been in a number of roundtables so far. We always very much appreciate everything he has to offer. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Mark. Mark, how you doing? Good to see you today.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me. I enjoy these very much. So happy to be here. But just to kind of play off what you were saying, though, I totally agree. I think more and more about it. And I think, about, well, not coming down so hard on yourself. It's like, I work out a lot and everything, and it's like with diets or anything, you feel like that if you haven't hit the ultimate goal that you're a failure, right? But every single thing really isn't about the ultimate goal. It's good to have things in mind, like directions, it would be, be a nice thing, or maybe it's something I want to get to this state one day or that state one day, but still life's all about the journey and every step. That's what it is. That's where all the time is spent. That's where all the work is done, is taking the steps. And to me, I don't want, if I'm trying to strive towards a goal or trying to work on something personal, sure, obviously I want to succeed at that. But, I think, and I've always been the person too, as well, just like you were saying that, one thing goes wrong, I'm going to, beat myself up for days and hours, lay awake in bed at night, thinking of everybody, thinking about how silly I was or what a failure I was, although everybody's sleeping pretty sound on their own business. But, I was that person. But it's kind of, it's another one of these things of, instead of trying to add something to, I'm kind of flipping these scripts in my head a little bit. I think I mentioned yesterday on a call that I'm looking at my baseline differently. So, whenever I fall in and out of, being aware, I'm looking at it differently. I'm more, instead of seeing awareness as my goal, and when I get, when I feel like I fell out of it, that I, failing or falling back, I'm seeing awareness as my new baseline. And when something else happens, it's kind of on top of that. And I'm like, oh, well, let me deal with that from this, instead of thinking of myself falling off of something. Does that make sense? So, I'm also thinking about, when I think about, I think we were briefly mentioned too, not feeling comfortable speaking or being afraid of making an error. Let's be honest, who doesn't get excited unless you're just a certain type of person, whenever you see someone that's speaking or in front of you or whatnot, actually have a human moment? That's what gives me strength, honestly, is to see other people have that moment, to see them not be the big eloquent speaker that did not miss a step, because that's going, that's, to me, it shouldn't be, but that's more intimidating. When I see, and I feel really fortunate that, it does happen to everybody. I don't think there's anybody in any of our groups that ever hasn't had one of those moments where you forget what you're saying. We talk about it all the time, but everyone that's afraid to speak is afraid of that. And I'm just like, I just want to be like, you don't know. It helps everybody. I love it. It makes me so happy because I can relate. We're all the same. This happens to everybody. This is normal. We're not here to pretend. We're not here to put on. We're not here to do that. We're just living our normal lives every day, and we're just showing up to talk about it. So, I just, so just like Ray said, yeah, I'm shocked that I'm even sitting here right now every time I do it, but I don't even think about it, and I don't get nervous. And that's really strange. If either of you, did actually truly know me, prior to about a year ago. And well, definitely even before I got here, but definitely before a year ago, because last year was an outlier year for me. I was not the same person at all, but I'm not this person, or I was not. That the label I had on myself was like, I would never do that. I'm not that person. And I guess here I am that person now. But it's just really neat. But I'm just trying to make sure and spread that message. Please don't be that way. All it does is help us all relate to you more and feel more comfortable and feel like we can step out there ourselves. So, it's like, and also, anytime I'm starting to see when I make a mistake now, instead of coming down on myself, I'm getting a little bit excited about the opportunity. I'm like, yeah, I wish I didn't mess that up, or I wish I hadn't made that little error, but oh my gosh, I got a little bit more work I can dig in over here. And it actually is starting to get to the point where it makes me excited. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts, but there you go.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. And I love the fact that you are actually inspiring a great many people in our Discord and our community as a whole. And I love the fact that you're not trying to. You'll even tell yourself that, well, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, which is fantastic. It just goes to prove my point about narratives and them not aligning with reality. I just wanted to say that the big part of this, I think, is the leaping. It's the absolute willingness to just jump in, regardless of what happens. And I hate to say it that way because I know there's a big part of us that's just like, right, and if I relax, it's going to go well. And if I don't judge myself, then everything's going to work out. And yeah, guess what? It may not. It's up to you on what you do with that. It's up to you to let go of the idea that there is a such thing as working out. There's no protection. You see what I'm saying? The more you just jump in and go, yeah, this could suck, and just do that, the better off you're going to be. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid, right? You can resist it and pull it a little bit at a time. And that sucks. That just prolongs the agony. Just tear that thing off, man. And I'm speaking directly to people who have access to this little round table here and haven't yet taken advantage of it, because there's no difference between this conversation and our group on Patreon. None. You could say to yourself, well, yeah, but there's an audience that's listening to this. It's all you. Understand, anything you're afraid of, the audience hearing from you, is just your fear about yourself. And you're just projecting it to this fictitious audience who you don't know. You can't know what they're thinking at all. Perhaps you are doing far more good than you think you are. And just like me and Mark and Andrew, you're just telling yourself that you're not. Out of habit. Jump in, see what's possible, see what people pick up, give them the chance to see you before you assume that you're not a benefit to them.
Yeah, that assumption cracks me up whenever it comes around to that, because we have the idea of, as Ray said, we have the idea of working out, and you don't fucking know. Like we all have this idea, and I still hold on to it a lot of times, that being as clear and concise and well-spoken, and if I have an analogy or an example, saying it in the most concise way is the best way. And we still settle upon that all the time, and we never actually know. So you might as well just jump in, because however it goes, you could sit there for 3 minutes being like, and that could be the best thing that anyone sees all day. Like, oh my God, they were actually, that's what I'm so afraid of. I was afraid of doing that for 5 seconds. That person just did it for a full minute. Like you don't know. And we're all just trying to connect with each other. And yet we're trying to put on this facade of like what we think is the best. We're still thinking about ourselves, but we're trying to connect with everyone else. And we don't realize that connection is driven through vulnerability, through letting our guard down, through jumping into a situation that we have no idea how it's going to work out, that we are not prepared for. And you either, people say you jump into a situation, you either sink or swim, but you don't know whether sinking or swimming is best for that situation. We always have the idea that swimming is what's best, but sinking a little bit and then learning to swim as you go is oftentimes equally as beneficial. And through all of those situations, as we stumble, mess up, do the thing that we're so afraid of, we have an opportunity then to let go of the idea that there was anything wrong with that, or let go of the idea that that wasn't what's best for the situation. And the more times you're able to jump in to things, the more opportunities you have to stumble, the more opportunities you have to let go of the idea that stumbling was wrong, and the more free you become. Like, it's just a constant unraveling of those assumptions as you go. And the less you think about yourself, as Mark just said, he doesn't even think about jumping on these anymore, just because he's not thinking about Mark, what it means about him, what it means about me, all this stuff. When you're not thinking about yourself so much, it makes it a lot easier to jump in. Not to say that jumping in while thinking about yourself isn't a possibility, but jumping in isn't always the easiest thing to do, but it's going to be a lot easier. It's like taking a performance enhancing drug almost. Like, not thinking about yourself is like a way to make jumping in so much easier. But as you're so caught up in yourself, it doesn't mean you can't jump in, but it's going to be a lot harder when everything that happens means something about you. But as you jump in, whether you're thinking about yourself or not, you're going to learn something. You're going to be able to let something go. You're going to be able to unravel some of those assumptions. And through the unraveling of those assumptions, you're unraveling your idea of yourself. And then the next time around, you're just not thinking about yourself so much because you had so many assumptions that were unraveled. And so it's harder to settle upon an idea of yourself because you had this idea that saying this thing perfectly was going to be what's best. And then someone was like, I really appreciated that you're able to get through that and, stumbled and forget what you were saying. And, you didn't bat an eye. That was incredible. And you're like, fucking hey, I had this whole idea that I couldn't do that, that was the worst thing. And then people are reaching out saying that's what helped them the most. So then it's like, you start to recognize that all of those assumptions aren't almost ever the truth. And you don't know the impact that you're going to have. And then it's just about finding out. Then stepping into it is the funnest part, the most fun part that you can have, because you are able to find out, you are able to have impact, and you're like, oh, that had that impact. Interesting. Would have never guessed. But then you find out.
I think my favorite example of that actually involves both of you in a Patreon call when Andrew hit the wall hard and had a moment where he just broke. And the option was he could have done that off the call with our brand new Patreon supporter, but he didn't. He went through it, and it just happened to be exactly what Mark needed to hear. It's exactly what the timing was perfect. And if you try to script that, it never works. See, that's the whole thing, is that you don't know the timing. You don't understand everything that's happening. All you have is your doubt that you're aligned with it. And oddly enough, that's the only thing that's causing you to not be aligned with it, is the fact that you keep having friction with it. You keep resisting what's happening. Everything that happens has to go through the filter of your preference and your fear and your opinion and your identity. And so nothing is just what it is. It's all what it is to you. And that causes a difference. And it made me think a little bit about this week's episode regarding emotion and intelligence. And in that episode, I really could not help but almost see emotion and feeling as if it was, I guess, a field of energy that almost extends out from us, that it's in fact another level of connection. Because as we've talked about in terms of telepathy and whatnot, everybody kind of misinterprets what telepathy is in terms of it being separate people talking to one another, because we use language. That's how we perceive this form of communication. But telepathy is the absence of an individual divided from the flow. So all of a sudden there's this recognition, oh shit, we're all thinking the same thing. We're perceiving it differently, but we're thinking the same thing. And so all of a sudden there's a communication that's on a different level entirely. Emotion, what we were trying to say in that episode, is very much the same thing. It's the underlying connection that we don't recognize because we're too focused on ourselves. It's my emotions, right? But if you were to think of it in terms of just a field that's going outward, like a liquid field, and everybody else has their own liquid field. And so we're very much like in an ocean. And as we come into contact with other people, based on our rigidity, we're causing giant waves of emotion because we're rigid. So they're crashing against us because we're divided from the people that we could be otherwise feeling. And that's causing our conflict and our fear, because that's an intense experience. But the more we relax, the less those emotions get so intense. The more we can start to see opportunities to connect, to be vulnerable, to just say something without thinking about it. And we find ourselves falling into timing. And so I think, again, emotion is another way that we are connected, kind of like that tapestry. But this one's not necessarily, I think it's both expressed three-dimensionally and not. I think it also goes towards that paradox. We're all in the subjective lack of place and time and the same person kind of thing. But yeah, it's just had me thinking ever since.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that discussion yesterday about emotions. And for anyone who hasn't checked that one out, it was a classic episode, but it was very much we honed in on emotions. It was bordering on a community topics that we were just like, we're going to talk about emotions today. And it's rare that we have a topic going in, but I'm glad that we did, because I think we covered it really well. And there is that, we came to that recognition that emotions are almost a way for us to connect, like how neurons in a brain connect, or mycelium in the earth connect. And we're so caught up in thinking that there's something wrong with our emotions, being too emotional, not holding back our emotions, hey, tone those down. They're a little too much for me. But they're our ability to connect with one another, but we've gotten so used to suppressing them, thinking that they shouldn't be, thinking that these emotions are bad or wrong. There's no objectively bad or wrong emotions. Like anger, sadness, they all have their place. None of them should objectively never be felt, but having awareness of them allows you to look at them and not try and suppress them, and not push them down, and not think that you should be getting rid of them, but it allows you to look at them for what they are and see what they're actually pointing to. And they may be pointing to a certain connection with other people, even. Like, as you're able to express those, people look at you and they're like, oh, I've felt that emotion. I feel that all the time. I've never seen someone express it openly, because I thought you weren't supposed to do that. And so there's like a bridge built there. There is the ability to connect through those emotions. And I've really enjoyed just kind of coming out of the spirituality side of this conversation, because I think in that conversation, there's sort of a judgment towards emotion. Like, as you become more aware of your emotions, you don't get pushed and pulled by them as much. And there's this narrative that you almost want it to be closer to the middle. You don't want to experience the extremes of emotions. There's still very much a narrative with that cuts off our connection. It's like, as we suppress our emotions, there's more walls built in between us that doesn't allow us to see those bridges, see those connections. And so emotions are very much an aspect of our ability to connect. And so it makes sense that it's gone hand in hand, that we feel less connection to ourselves through each other. And we suppress our emotions that much more these days. Most of the drugs that we take are numbers. They're suppressants. They suppress, they don't allow you to feel the spectrum of those emotions, when really they're pointing to something. They're always pointing to something. So if you aren't able to feel them, it's like you're going to be even more lost than you were when you thought that the emotions were steering you the wrong way, because you weren't looking up. You were so focused on the emotion, judging that, not realizing that it's pointing to something, and it always has been.
So this is something I'd like to discuss, or at least explore a little bit with the two of you. As you start to get more of your own balance, as you start to get a feel for the emotional spectrum that you are currently embodying and experiencing via your mentality and all of that, and you start to find your sea legs, and you're not afraid of necessarily being afraid, right? You're not angry about getting angry, all that kind of stuff. Like, you've more or less accepted it's an experience, it'll pass. kind of like a fart in the wind, right? But then you come to the experience of hanging out with someone else and you're in their reality. And maybe this is a stranger, maybe it's not. And immediately, regardless of all of this newfound balance that you have found, you find yourself anxious and almost like resisting the anxiety. You're like, what the fuck? Why do I feel so anxious around this person? And immediately out of habit, you go, I'm going through it again. And what's interesting is that may not be actually the case. You may not actually be going through your anxiety again, though you are going through your anxiety in the larger sense. We're connected. We can feel the vibe of a room when we enter into it. When we're talking to someone, if you're open enough, you can feel very much their intentions in the conversation. You can feel a lot more than they're communicating with their language, is what I'm saying. And so given that, I think there's one part of it that's getting out of your own way, one part of it's being vulnerable, being that exposed nerve. And then there's the recognition that also gives you the ability to connect and feel what the other nerves are going through to a greater degree, that it's not necessarily just about your character going through it. Now, in fact, you're, like I said to Amanda, you're being a gym buddy. You're able to actually see that they're overtaxed on that weight, and you're going to be like, hey, let me give you a hand with that. Right. But it's because you can share their conscious environment. This is, again, going back to the retreat. This is something that's very true. It got to the point where people at the last retreat started looking at Andrew and I like, just stay out of our head. It's like, we're not in your head. We're just here with you. It's just intuitive, right? That's all it is. It's the fact that we're not actually divided. It's just, I'm so self-absorbed, I can't see you.
Yeah, I absolutely have felt that. And it's interesting because we tend to so often be caught up in ourself, in our idea of ourself, that we couldn't even fathom the fact that we could be experiencing someone else's reality, even when we let go of thinking of ourselves so seriously. We can still get caught up in thinking that it means something about us, no matter how deep into that we get. So it's important to keep in mind that there comes a point where, because it is one mind, because there isn't any actual division, as someone else is experiencing something, you could start to experience that. And it almost is telling of where you are in terms of a letting go. It's like, it's not that there's any sort of fucking like graduation or any of that sort of bullshit. I'm not trying to say that at all, but it's like when you are able to feel someone else's emotions, you're at a place where you can handle it, and you can, as long as you don't come back into the picture and you think it means something about you, like, okay, this is an aspect of my reality right now. And so I think I don't know if I remember where I was going with that. I was reading some of the comments before you pass it over, and I was starting to have some thoughts about those. So I guess I'll just go with one of those. Careful of getting into the empath discussion of this, because that very much is going to bring you back into it. And as you start to feel, other people's emotions or experiences, and you're like, oh, this must make me an empath. This must make me better. And it makes you feel better about yourself. It's a trap. Careful of that. Careful of building that idea of yourself, because it's not going to be about the other person in that situation. It's going to be about you and what it means about you and how much you're able to do to them or help them. And it's not about you helping them. It's just about being there as them. But if you're an empath, it's going to get in the way of that ability. And like with every identity-based thing that makes you feel better, there's going to be a double-edged sword to that experience. And I don't know, just be careful of thinking that means something about you and it raises your value because you can feel other people's emotions more than you used to be able to.
I'd say that that's a fair point, though we are in fact talking about the reality that there is connection that all of us can open ourselves up to. The defining of oneself can be definitely self-limiting, right? And so on that note, and I want to pass this over to Mark, because Mark, again, you tend to be somebody who's focused more on the application of this rather than, you know, the spirituality. Let's just say it's about the real world interaction in the moment. How do I get rid of this fucking weight so I can enjoy my existence while I'm here? That kind of thing. Exactly. What would you say your thoughts on the quote unquote empath movement would be right now? I don't know if you've run across this, people who identify as an empath and tend to give themselves certain characteristics as a result of that identification that separates them from other people. Have you run across this at all in your foray into spirituality?
Yeah, yeah, I've read about this a lot, and I'll be honest, there's been times it's gone through my head because I have thought that or felt that I was sensitive to energy in a room, sensitive to energy. I've described people before as, that person has a really like static around them, like they're like have porcupine energy when they come around. I'm just like this. And then there's some people whose energy feels really good. And, I've made statements like that before. I've read things about the empath label. I've had thoughts of, oh, I might be like that, but yes, at this point, obviously that's just another label in a box and whatnot. And I think that anybody, or I think all have the potential to sense whatever, and be whatever. It's all just a matter, obviously, well, I won't say obviously, but I think that we might agree that it's all just a matter of where you're at, in your awareness and your journey or whatnot. And not saying that I definitely, hadn't had some of these realizations in the past, but I have, worked a very long time on just being aware and being aware of how I affect where the people I'm around, how they affect me and those type of things, and how, just trying to learn self-awareness. But so, yeah, absolutely. And I've got one long-time friend on Facebook who always loves to run around and throw out the empath and also goes to, here's all the struggles I have because I'm an empath. It puts so much stress on you in this. And I get it if you've got yourself wound up in that, because you can say, okay, I'm an empath. I soak in everyone's energy and all their problems, and then I have to process them and those type of things. So absolutely familiar with it for sure. And, I guess I'm just trying to think at this point, how, well, one thing's for sure, I'm trying not to make those immediate thoughts in my head that box people in like I used to. Like I'd be like, oh, that person just showed up and brought the energy down. I mean, I'm automatically boxing someone in there. So I am trying to just ease back a little bit as far as that goes. Like I said, I don't really think that I don't really think that, if I feel like I am kind of sensitive to maybe being able to tell what kind of energy someone might be giving off, or maybe sharing in, as you mentioned, if someone's feeling anxiety and I can kind of tell that there's something, going on with that person or something they're dealing with right now. Now, that doesn't give me any extra qualifications or anything by any means, whereas in the past I might have been led to believe that. I definitely know not now. I guess I'm just trying to get to the point now that no matter what might be going through my head, that I just kind of sitting back as much as I can and not trying to make judgments or take actions based on what I think I might be sensing or think I might be this, and just kind of taking back and just seeing what happens with that interaction or whatever. So that's kind of a little bit of a difference. I think in the past I might have, immediately been like, oh, you seem like you're so-and-so, what's going, and I might have gotten more kind of jumped off from it and been like, I can kind of tell this, what do you think? I'm kind of noticing this about you. I'm definitely not doing that now, or having thoughts of doing that, pushing intervention or whatnot based on what I might be thinking is wrong. I hope this goes along with what you were, kind of that what you had in mind as far as discussing it. This is kind of what's going through my head. So, but I am just trying to lay back. I do definitely, I'm just trying to take everything in around me with whoever I might be, in presence with right then. I'm trying to just, let them communicate whatever they communicate, and I'll communicate whatever I communicate, and just go from there. So, I think that's the one difference I could state, is that in the past, whenever I felt that way and thought I had some kind of a leg up, you know, as far as being able to sense a room or sense what, kind of energy a person's given across or whatnot, is to just no longer automatically label that, no longer put them in a box immediately and maybe like, no, I'm staying away from that person right now. I can tell their energy's bad. Just trying to be, I see all this stuff in my head, or my perception or whatever, but just still just kind of being here. It's kind of like the whole thing of, I'm trying to think about how to relate this to feeling emotions and all these things, but it really is that whole, I'm still experiencing a lot of things. I still have a lot of thoughts. I still have a lot of things go through my head during my normal work day or when I'm at the gym. All those things are still there, but I am extremely more consistently still at the same time experiencing it, but keeping a finger out here. Does that make sense? It's like, I think that's why I was fortunate the first time that I did mushrooms. And the whole time, a lot of things happened that time. Doesn't really anymore, but it did the first time. But the whole time I kept picturing myself with an arm kind of outside to the side, like holding on to a ledge, at this point, I know it was my ego I was holding on to. I'm like, okay, this is ego, Mark. I've still got a hold of that. So no matter what kind of dragons I see here or what happens, I've still, I know that I'm over here. It's fine. It's not gone. It's still there. And I'm kind of doing that in my daily life now. So whatever kind of perceptions or things that go through my head or judgments go through my head, oh, that person seems so and so, all those things, I'm still seeing those things. Those thoughts pop up and stuff, not quite as, loud as they were, but all that still is interesting information. It's there. I mean, I can notice it, but I'm able to simultaneously still be over here and be like, okay, I see all that. Yeah, just chill. Yeah, we'll take it all in. Yeah, it's good information, but yeah, no, just chill. It's good. So and that's kind of how it feels, and and it's really neat. I think it goes along with everything that we talk about, but it really is. I'm able to still play my little ego roles that I need to. I still get caught up in them a little bit, but it feels like that I don't really get extremely lost in it without my hand over here anymore. Like, especially the last month or so, it's gotten even easier. I don't want to say easier because I'm not trying. I'm just saying, it's just consistent. That I've got this awareness over here. I'm keeping an eye on everything. It's kind of both ways. I guess it's that, it's like a duality. I'm doing my ego stuff, but I'm at the same exact time, I'm still conscious outside of it. And the two together are working very well together. And I don't know. I think that's where my train of thought has led me right now. Yeah, so I'll pass it back to you.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate it. I think you're really going to enjoy that episode on emotions and intelligence, because it's very much the process that you're talking about right now, about the process of there's the ego and then there's the awareness that can watch and participate if one wishes to or not. But the awareness itself also has its own emotional spectrum. When you stop being attached to the ego and all of its fear, all of a sudden you're opened up. You're still feeling emotions, but they're not driven by that identity to the same degree. So those emotions may not be ours individually, more or less what we were going with. And if we're not distorting it, just like distorting the flow of intelligence, it's the same flow, right? Then maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe that's what you're feeling when you're not thinking about yourself, is the general field around you. And it's not field around you because, again, that implies some kind of division, which goes back to the point we were making earlier, that it's not empathy, or rather it's a limited form of empathy if it involves you and another, because there's a disconnect. And that's the problem with the label empath, which is I think where Andrew was trying to go just before I started rambling, in terms of there's a label there. There's an idea of yourself that somehow separates you from everyone else. And I would like to present this as a thought for anybody who's listening to this right now, who's thinking like, right, but I am more sensitive than other people to what everybody else is feeling. And I would like to I guess, present this concept. Perhaps you're not. Perhaps you're just slightly more aware that you can be affected by other people. See, everybody else who's going through it and they're rigid and they're afraid and they're lashing out and they're all me and mine and all of that and pushing you away and manipulating and all that. Why do you think they're doing that, if not for the fact that they're getting hit by the same shit you are? They're getting hit by the same emotions, the same waves that you're going through. It's just that they think of themselves as totally separate, so they don't see themselves as a part of everyone else. They're just as much an empath, but they don't recognize the connection. On the flip side to that, you can go too far, like Mark was saying, where you can actually start to say to yourself like, oh God, the connection is, it's so hard on me because I'm an empath and I'm overly sensitive, to which point you have to come back to your own role in this. And this is where sometimes you'll hear people starting to do that thing, like imagine an egg of light and aura around you to protect you from all of those. You don't need to do that. All you have to do is stop being afraid. It's all you have to do. Just stop thinking it's overwhelming. Stop telling yourself the story. See, that's the whole point, is if you're an empath and you're connected to everybody, that's because you're connected to everybody, which means that you're everybody. You don't have that limitation unless you decide to build it up in your head. And we all do this. We all build things up in our head and it becomes bigger than they actually are. And you can do that in any way, shape, or form all the time. Like at the moment right now on TikTok, I have somebody who has been diagnosing me with narcissistic personality disorder for the last like 4 days. And they are just going on a rant. And anybody who says anything to them is immediately also a narcissist, which is incredibly convenient. And it's just because they have a label for themselves and anybody who threatens that self. And they rely on it all the time. And it separates them further and further and further from the thing that they should be trying to tackle. The concept is never the truth. And that includes empath. And understand, I say this, understanding that it's easy to get attached to that because it's a good word. It's not that it's not a good word, especially when you come down to what you're feeling and the fact that you're recognizing your connection. You're like, yeah, how about you just be empathic rather than being an empath? How about you just be empathy, the experience, the embodiment of empathy? Because the word empath makes me uncomfortable in the same way as shaman, right? And it's just one of those things where it's just like, there's so much meaning, and yet there shouldn't be. Because the reality that we're trying to communicate is that we're all one, that we're all equal. And anything that's removing us from that reality, from that experience, is getting in the way of the very empathy that we treasure so much.
And as you said, that empathy, that connection can go on both ends. Like you can feel cut off from it, but then you start labeling yourself as an empath, feeling like you are an empath. And you can take that so far that because you've settled upon a certainty that you are this, it's like super overwhelming. And then on top of that, you're settling upon a certainty that the overwhelming is something that you shouldn't be feeling. This overwhelming level of emotion or connection that you're feeling with everything is something that you shouldn't be feeling, because you still have you involved. Like without you, it's not so overwhelming because your opinion of the situation isn't as relevant anymore. It's just your preference that's getting in the way. It's just your opinion that's getting in the way. If that goes away, all of a sudden it's just a feeling. It's just that state of connection, but you start to feel a deeper state of connection with reality, because is our natural state that we've just been able to, build so many walls and barriers against. You start to feel more of that, and it's different than what you felt before. You start to have an opinion of it, like, ooh, this is too much connection right now, as opposed to just looking at it for what it is without so much you in the way. And you may see, oh, this is closer to reality. I'm actually a lot closer to reality right now. And as you begin to go through all of those experiences, it really does come down to remaining uncertain. And Mark, I think you're pointing to this really well. Like, as you settle upon the idea that you're an empath, like you're settling upon a certainty. You're settling upon an idea that this is what I am. And if I'm this, then I can't be that. If I'm an empath, then I can't also be you. So immediately it creates a barrier. As much as you're feeling what that person's feeling, you couldn't possibly be them. You couldn't see a deeper connection because you're an empath, because you have settled upon a certainty about what you are. And if you are that, then you're not anything else. And it limits your ability to connect. Quite frankly, it's like you get a little taste of that connection and you immediately run to something that validates yourself and gives you more value because you want to feel better because you're afraid and you don't see the inherent value in you. And so you need to label yourself as something in order to feel better in an uncertain reality. And then you've settled upon that and you've cut yourself off from the flow. You're no longer in the flow. You are, but you aren't. You're cutting yourself off from the ability to continue to derive benefits through freedom of being in the flow and knowing that you're in the flow. There's nothing wrong with remaining uncertain about what you are. You never have to settle upon something that you are. You never have to define yourself. People will respond like, "Oh, yes, you do. You have to define yourself. If I don't know what I am, then what am I?" You've never known what you are. That's the thing. You can make up bullshit, but it doesn't mean that's what you are. Doesn't mean it's ever what you are. You're never what you think you are, and you never know what you are. And so it's okay to remain uncertain about that, because in uncertainty, you remain free. Mark?
Yeah, you can only label yourself like in this one moment. I mean, if you're even going to attempt to do it, it's only applicable, and it's not applicable anymore after you finish the sentence, right? I mean, it might be applicable right this very second. Oh, it's done now. You're different now. I think the thing for me that has, and I know it's not, I'm sure I've said it, but here's what's fun. I think that I found the episode of your podcast, Andrew, that was after your realization. It was like a month gap between July and August. And then you came back and you're like, I've been wanting to do this for a while. Was that it? I think so. But anyway.
I don't even remember, but I think you're right.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was very intriguing. But anyway, I watched that recently. And and one of the biggest things you came out with first, or that was going through your mind in the beginning was, what if I don't have a past, right? And I was talking to my buddy about that this past weekend a little bit. I have to, I just kind of have to sit back and let him drive the conversation, and I just kind of ride along and be who I am right now whenever the opportunity arises. But the real thing that I really want people, or I don't want to say that. Let's just say that has really been amazing for me when it became tangible, is that really, honestly, I know that this world is structured on remembering the past for everyone and recording it into utmost detail and making you believe that that is who you are, because it's, especially nowadays, it's everywhere. It's recorded everywhere. You're graded on everything. There's this, that, whatever. That's part of the game. But there is, you can't, there's no arguing that today, if I decided that I didn't want to be the person in the role in my job I'm in, or whatever I'm doing, the person that had 2 dogs, the person that this, that, and the other, if I wanted to change it, I could, and no one could stop me. And yes, we're not frequently going to just change the whole life that we've set up for ourselves. And obviously a lot of it has been based on, what we've wanted to achieve or whatnot. So that's not something people do, every 5 minutes is totally change their life. But the thing is you have to really you know, when you really get to the point where you realize, no, you really, really can. There's nothing that you can do. You really can do whatever. You can be a different person today. And where it really became tangible for me is, you know, with my social awkwardness, with my not wanting to talk to people, not wanting to go out in public, not wanting to be in small talk situations, not wanting to stand out for wearing clothes I wish I could wear, all that stuff, is that it really did. I was like, it just really became tangible to me that I'm just playing this part. I really don't have to. You know, all the years before when people were like, well, you could do that. And I was like in my head, no, I can't. Now I really see that I can. And although I don't do it every time, I'm taking moments where I'm like, I'm like, no, I'm just going to do that. You know, I'll put something on and think I'm going to go to the gym. And then I'm like, it would have been one of those things that I would have went back into the house and changed. And I'm just like, no, I'm not done with it. You know, and I just go. But you know, I'm trying to tie that together, but it is almost everything that I restrict myself, well, really everything that I restrict myself on, or the way I live my life. I mean, the most important parts of my life, as far as socializing and expressing myself and all those things, I didn't have to live restricted at all in any which way, shape, or form. And anybody that I saw that I was like, I wish I was as outgoing as them, or I wish I would have went to that. Well, I could have. I literally could have. I could get up tomorrow and totally just come off as a totally different person. It's just the choices I'm making. And that I'm, you know, whether, you know, at this point, I don't think that, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of things I'm telling myself stories about that maybe I haven't quite uncovered yet, but I really am seeing the string of my stories in almost everything, and really just seeing that every limitation I put on myself, every description really, I mean, maybe I like them and that's fine, but it is optional. It is something I have chosen. Even if I don't like it, I still have chosen it, and I can change it tomorrow if I want to. And I really believe that now. I mean, I hate the word believe. I know that now. And I do know it now. I've really been trying not to say the word believe, because the things that have, you know, I know these things. I know them because I'm living it. I see what happens. I see how things work, and I just know these things. So, and I hope I'm setting a great example for losing train of thought again, because I think I did, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that either, because that's another thing. I mentioned this on a call a few weeks ago. I think one of my favorite things is watching somebody grind through it. It's like actually watching them look off in the distance and try and come up with the words. One, that's when I relate, but two, you're like, this is coming straight down. You know, they're not modeling this, they're not rehearsing this, they're not researching this, they're not trying to find a bunch of other people's words to put together. Like, this is organic. This is thought in process, expression in process. So, you know, I wanted to throw that out there too, because I love that. And I think that's my favorite. It's just amazing to watch. And so that's just another plug out there I'm throwing to, you know, get on these damn calls and open your mouth, because there's no reason not to. It just makes the rest of us happier and more brave. So there we go.
Holy shit. I just want to say that was awesome. That was awesome, Mark. I mean, I got to tell you, man, it took me forever and numerous experiences in watching my life or a current iteration of me burn to the ground to realize that that's okay. That's okay. And I've tried to communicate to people for years that, yeah, absolutely, that sucks. Situation, you can leave, right? Like, there's an option that you can just up and do something else. That's something you can do. You have that freedom. And the mind is always like, no. But once you get it, then it's not that you have to. See, that's the thing. Once you understand you can just pick up and leave, you don't have to. But your perspective of everything has changed. You're no longer trapped by your life, right? It changes everything you do. And so, Mark, I just want to say, man, fucking A. I'm so excited to talk to you at the retreat. I'm so excited by the progress that I've just seen you make in the short amount of time that I've known you. And I'm so excited that everybody else who's watching this, who's going to listen to this after the fact, gets to witness everything that you are, because it's great to see.
I'm gonna thank you. I do want to mention two other things, but no, thank you for those words so much. I thought one thing, when you were talking about the individual that you had spoken with, I think alcohol. Here's just, an example. I was invited to, and I don't think I've mentioned it on one of these calls, but I was invited to, or one of these roundtables, but I was invited to a party around Christmas. And, that always strikes fear and terror into my heart, being invited to anything. But I happen to have a neighbor who's a French artist, and he's actually an extremely impressive artist. Like, wow. Because I actually went to one of his little showings and I was like, whoa, I had no idea what I was getting into. But still, every time he invites me, I have no desire to go. I'm like, oh God, I'm not going to know anybody there but him. He's going to be busy. I'm going to feel like an idiot. Anyway, I always do that. Christmas, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make myself go. I'm going to make myself go. I go through all this stuff all the time. And I was in the DU community then. So I was like, I can do this. Yeah, I'm going to go. There's no reason I can't go, which was true. So I got all dressed and everything. And I went and parked in the parking lot and sat there for an hour and watched people come and go and all these things. And I could not bring myself to go in. So I'm like, okay, here I go again. I'm doing the same thing. Sometimes I've been able to, but most of the time I don't. And I go to all this trouble and I sit here and I don't go in. Well, the big thing that happened to me that night that was really amazing for me, and I think relates to this a little bit, is I decided I was going to go home and that I wasn't a failure for not walking in. I decided that every time that you don't quite get to the point that maybe you were aiming for, it doesn't mean you're a failure. Every time that maybe you regress a little bit, or you maybe go off your diet, or you miss this, or you miss that, again, it is about the journey. It's not about the destination. It's about the next step, but it's also about just realizing that all those alternatives are part of the journey. How am I going to experience what it feels like when I do go in if I don't have it to compare to the times when I almost went in and didn't, and all that plethora? But that's why we're here, is for all of it. So that was the first time that I didn't punish myself or talk down to myself. And I cried, because I was just like, I sat there like the last 15 minutes and I was like, I'm just going to end up going home again and I'm a failure. And I was like, wait, why? I go in sometimes. If I go in 5 times out of 10, that's great. If I go in 1 time out of 10, that's great. But even if I didn't go in, I thought about it. I got dressed. I drove down here. I actually had a good time listening to music for an hour in my car. But I'm not a failure. It's okay. I'm going to give myself permission to experience this part too and be okay with it and go home. And you know what? That makes it easier the next time, because I'm like, well, if I go and I decide not to go in, I'm not going to treat myself like shit for a week. And so, I know issues with alcohol can be more challenging than maybe a social issue. It depends on perspectives and who it is and all those things. But again, with exercising or anything, one failure, so many people let that sabotage the whole journey. If I didn't do it perfect, then none of it was worth it. I'm a failure. I'm not going to try anymore. All those things. And none of that is true, because we're only here for the experience. We're not in reality to achieve certain goals. We're just in reality. It's all valid. Every aspect of experience is valid. It's all, I think, generally equal in value. I know there's certain things we prefer not to, and certain things we'd prefer to, based on how it feels here in our little meat suit. But still, in general, experience is experience. All of it is worthy and valid. And but that was a big thing for me, to just not come down on myself for not being perfect every time, or doing this, or telling myself that if I don't do this one particular thing this way by this time, then the whole thing's a failure. And so that was a real huge thing for me. And that's the only last other thing I wanted to slip in here that I've been working on lately. I've mentioned several times that I laugh at myself a whole lot, and it's become a habit. But I think we always think that everything should work out perfectly. Well, of course we do. We plan things out, we expect things to happen, all these things, and we get so upset at the littlest thing that goes wrong that we didn't anticipate. But as we all know, you can't anticipate anything. And I try to change your perspective to where you're surprised if everything does go exactly as you envisioned it. That's kind of where I'm at. Every time something goes wrong now, I'm just like, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it? And I laugh and I get a good laugh out of it. And I mean, even things that hurt, but I mean, I've practiced that and it works. So my baseline for that is, of course, something's going to go crazy. Just be open to it from the beginning and think, okay, I'm kind of thinking that this is probably, this is kind of the idea of what's going to happen, but who knows? And I'm going to go into it that way. So when something does happen that I didn't quite envision or plan for, I'm just going to be like, why wouldn't that have happened? So let's just see what I do with that. It really helps a lot. And it does take practice, but that's another perspective I think that we should all need to change. Don't go into a call or start to speak and think this has to go perfect or nothing. No, just going to be like, I'm probably going to be all over the place and that's fine. And then see what happens. It just really changes things. It's changed things for me a lot. And so those are the couple of things I wanted to share there.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. I just wanted to toss in very quickly. There is actually a direct connection between what you're experiencing and the eventual habit of alcoholism. Like those moments where you judge yourself, where you sit in your car and you're like, oh God, I'm less than because I didn't do this thing. They build up, they start accumulating. And eventually you hear this constant fucking buzzing in your head of self-deprecation, of self-loathing, of self-judgment. And eventually the only alternative is to drink, is to take something that's going to shut that up. And that's exactly what often happens. And so if you can recognize that it's the accumulation of those moments where you don't weed the garden, you don't set yourself free, that ends up with the bigger consequences, then it's just mitigating that one at a time. When you find yourself judging yourself, let it go, right? Take a page out of Mark's book, as it were, just put it down, right? At least give yourself the time to process it. One more quick announcement, and then I'll pass it over to Andrew. I also want to mention, of course, that we have been joined by Alexandra, which I'm always happy to say. We are currently in the process of helping to support one of our community members. And what I mean by that is we have a retreat coming up in the Netherlands on November 11th to November 19th. And one of our members, AJ, would like to join us at that retreat. Unfortunately, AJ doesn't necessarily have the funds to do so. So if you can help out, doesn't matter what it is, 5, 10, 20 bucks, it all helps. He has a GoFundMe page that you can go and visit. It is linked on our website in the navigation bar under community. You will find send AJ to the retreat, in which case you can help send AJ to the retreat. And we really appreciate that help, of course, if you can do it. If not, no problem at all. Just maybe share the link so somebody else can help him.
Absolutely. Let's get AJ to the retreat. Fuck yeah. But real quick, and then I'll pass it off to Alexandra to introduce herself, reintroduce herself, whatever you want to call it. But it really is that subtle shift, and we get so caught up in the idea of always needing to make that sort of linear progress in leaps and bounds, thinking that we know what progress even means. And so sitting in your car thinking that, what's best is going to this thing is still settling upon a certainty. But for me, what it's really come down to is how quickly I can let go of my judgment of whatever happens. Because I used to judge myself so much, and that's what allowed me, that's what pushed me to do a lot of things, it's like, I'm going to feel bad about myself if I tell myself before I go to bed that I'm going to get up and go to the gym and have my gym clothes there. And then I don't go, I'm going to feel so bad that I just can't even do that. And so I wouldn't, and I would force myself to, but then sometimes I still wouldn't. And then I would spend an hour or two judging myself or feeling worse about myself. Same thing, with meditation. I got so caught up in that. And then it was like, if I missed it for a bit, I would have to fucking go to the bathroom at work and sit in the stall for 5 minutes and just sit there because I felt like I needed to do it. And if I didn't do it, then I would feel bad about myself, judge myself. And it's like that's the thing that you're working on. And then you're judging yourself for not doing the thing that allows you to work on, the thing because you think that's doing the work when really it's just dropping the judgment, more quickly. So, but it really is those subtle shifts. And yeah, for me with progress is really just measured based on how quickly I can let my judgment go, how little judgment or opinion I can have of something. So the actions, the progressive movements towards doing things that I'm afraid of aren't really it anymore. It's more just like how quickly can I let go of the judgment? And then as the judgment subsides, it's like there's more freedom, there's less weight. And so you feel more free to do the things that you were afraid of. Whereas before, when you're still caught up in the judgment, it's like there's still a lot of weight holding you back and a lot of resistance. But you can go through it, not do the thing that you want to do and not judge yourself for it. Like the next time around, there's going to be like a subtle shift that makes doing that easier because you're not holding all of that weight. But anyway, just want to throw that in there. Alexandra, welcome. Alexandra was a guest on season 4, episode 14 of Dualistic Unity. Fantastic fucking episode. Always great having you in the conversations. She knows tons of useless trivia. So I will pass it off to Alexandra. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good morning. I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well.
We
Thank you for having me
recorded
today.
an episode on Soylent Green this morning. So Andrew and I are keeping it light today.
You had an episode on
Soylent Green. Have you ever watched the movie Soylent Green?
No, but I so look forward to hearing about it.
I
I
definitely
know that's
recommend it.
surprising. Usually I'm like, oh yeah, and then I just rattle off one of the lines from the movie. So hence your surprisement. Oh man.
Oh, it's nice to see you. As always, I just decided to cut you off with that useless fact. You asked how we were doing. That's how we're doing. We spent the morning talking about overpopulation and trying to put a nice shiny veneer on it. So now we're having this conversation about just saying, fuck it. And I'm going to transition back to you because I just wanted to mention, actually, Alexandra, very much like Mark, is a perfect example of how to just say, fuck it, because she originally came into the groups and now she is one of the most active members in our groups, always offering some advice or words of encouragement. She's been on 2 or 3 roundtables now. She's been on an episode. She actually just came out of work to be on this episode with us. So she is having a huge fuck it moment right now. And so it's just another perfect example of what we've been talking about in this entire episode is that you may not recognize it, but just your own individual leaps and strides ahead, even sometimes falling backwards a little bit, is exactly what other people need to see. You may not even realize you're doing it for them, but they're you.
I think I have such a timely example of a fuck it moment in the sense that not in the sense that whereby is the correct word. I was on the podcast. I was on the podcast a week ago or something, and then afterwards I doom spiraled hard. I was like, fuck that up. I had nothing smart to say, and I'm shit, and I'm this and I'm that, because I'm, as you'll hear in the episode, queen of self-deprecation as well as trivia. And then I just got over myself, and I actually listened to it. And I've just been taking my own advice since, for once, because I think I give very good advice, but very seldom take it. And so I have just been laughing at myself since, thinking, how could I just, I've just been talking my own, walking my own talk. And it's been hilarious. Like you put up a reel the other day of something that I said within the podcast. And it was like, it's so arrogant of you to assume you'll ever know what the best case outcome is or the worst case outcome is. So you better just fuck it and fuck around and find out. And it finally hit me. I was like, oh, actually, I said that. Oh, I actually came up with that. Okay, maybe I'm actually not shit. And then I've just been laughing at myself since, because I'm like, I have no fucking idea what I think of myself. And that's a really good thing. And I finally see Ray's point now, where like self-deprecation can actually be really humbling, but everything in moderation. Yes. Yes, as a result of me thinking I desperately fucked up, I actually found utility in my own advice for once, I think. Big fuck it moment. Really glad I fucked around and I found out.
Fuck yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear that. I love to hear when it kind of comes full circle to that. You start beating yourself up, thinking, doom spiraling or whatever it is that you call that. I don't think I've ever heard that word before, but I understand it. I've certainly been there. And then it comes around, you see something that you said, and you're like, oh shit, I had this like veil over this that if it was me, I couldn't possibly hear it because of the thing that I'm saying, and then I'm saying this that's actually relevant to what I'm thinking about right now. It's fucking hilarious. And you had a bunch of amazing things that you said in that, and there's more clips to come of that, so get ready to chew on some more of your own advice, because there was a lot of good stuff in there, and there will be more clips coming out. But I find it to be very funny when, in moments of clarity, you say something and then you get caught up in things, and then you kind of remember that, or there's documentation of it, and then you get to go listen back to a video and you're like, oh wow, there's something. But it's just telling to, I don't know, like we think being clear is always the best thing to be in. And it's like the doom spiraling, the distortion kind of informs those moments. And without having gone through that before, you wouldn't have been able to say something like that on the podcast. Like you have to go through that experience of being so caught up in thinking that you know what's right and wrong, and then finding out that, oh, you weren't actually correct. And then it comes full circle to being through that again, and then hearing yourself say it. And so the next time around, you're like, maybe you just remember it a little bit more quickly, but it's that constant sort of swinging of the pendulum, going back and forth, getting caught up in things, and the willingness to get caught up in things and kind of go through it and throw caution to the wind and experience stuff that emboldens your experience. It gives yourself depth. And I think so many of us are unwilling to explore that and to build those things within ourselves, all of those experiences that come from saying fuck it and diving in, and then finding something out about ourselves, thinking that we didn't say anything right, and then turns out, oh, that did make a lot of sense. Oh, maybe I say things that make a lot more sense way more often than I think. And it kind of triggers something in your brain that kind of doesn't create a new narrative, but lets go of one of those narratives that were holding you back from diving in more and more frequently, finding out more about yourself, experiencing more of yourself through all of those situations.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's important too to recognize that it's not just fuck it throwing yourself into new situations. It's also fuck it, I'm just going to say it. It's really important to recognize that, like even with people, familiar situations where you just kind of fall into lockstep with what you've always done or how you've always acted around people because you're worried it might rock the boat. You're worried it might catch them off guard. Maybe they're not going to like the new you. And so you're not talking to them about any of the things that you're currently interested in because, maybe they don't share that interest. There's this danger that maybe they're not going to be my friend anymore. Fuck it. Right? Because if you think about it, they're not really your friend now. You're not actually being yourself. They're the friend of a previous you. So you're very much hurting yourself and them. Whereas if you just said, fuck it, expressed yourself, you were authentic and said, well, if you're not going to be my friend, then I guess we're not friends now. And you just accept that without thinking it diminishes your value or that you'll never make friends again. Then what you'll find is that your friendships evolve as you do. Your situation continues to change and adapt as you change and adapt because you're not holding on to situations or places or people or anything. Fuck it is a whole revolution. It's a way of life. It really is. And that includes being willing to be in an uncomfortable situation, to get into an argument with, say, your partner, to have it out, to go, fuck it, because the alternative is more of this. And that really is it. Fuck it is the solution to what is currently this. Because you know what's going to keep coming if you keep doing what you're doing. More of this. Or you say, fuck it, this will change. Right? And that's the whole point. You have to be willing to let it go for it to become something other than what you want it to be or fear it might be. Once you let it go, it can be anything.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think the willingness to go into a situation like there's so many aspects of that, and the reason that we hold ourselves back is because of the concern and the settling upon a certainty as if we ever know, too, like being willing to find out and say fuck it and converse with someone about something. Even, like in my own life. I went through a lot of back and forth with family and friends when I started posting about, questioning religion, posting about mushrooms, all that stuff. There have been a number of situations where people have come around and been like, you know what? Religion is kind of whack. There's a lot of weird shit going on there. And, mushrooms, yeah, maybe they're not as bad as I thought. Maybe it was just, big pharma trying to suppress something because they're greedy motherfuckers and just trying to make more money. Maybe they're not this eerie thing that's so bad for you, and this Schedule 1 drug and all this whack ass shit. And if I hadn't been willing to start talking about it, like those people never would have come across that and been willing to, go through the fucking screaming arguments that I had with people telling me what I should and shouldn't post on my social media accounts. And if I hadn't been willing to face that and not back down from that, say, fuck it, I'm going to do this. And if you're not about it, you can hop off and, you won't see me as much, because I had, conviction, and it was just where I was at, and I was willing to face it. But there was a time in my life where I wouldn't have even initially done it. And once people came around saying like, careful, I don't know, you sure about that? I would have stopped as well. At some point I would have stopped, and I wouldn't have been willing to see it through. But in the fuck it mentality, like, no, this is my experience. This is my situation. These are my thoughts, and I'm not going to not speak out about them. Well, be careful. Yeah. If everyone is also always careful and so concerned with, what waves they were going to make by something that they said, nothing would ever be said. We would just deepen into being crumbled by those who are willing to say it and take control and manipulate and utilize their power in order to suppress everything that anyone ever wanted to say, because there's always going to be people willing to say things, and you have shit to say. Everyone has shit to say, and you can get so caught up in wondering if you have anything of value to say, or you can say fuck it and just start talking and find out what happens. And there's inevitably going to be experiences that you couldn't even fathom having through opening up, through being willing to speak your mind. And, there's sometimes things that I say and I'm like, ooh, probably could have said that in a different way. Probably started that one off a little bit too aggressive. But you find your balance over time, and you can't see where that line is, where that edge is, without experiencing it. You can't look at it from the sidelines and be like, I think the line's over there, so I'm not going to get close to it. You have to feel that. You have to experience that. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's how you find out.
But man, if I just explain the line to you enough, that'll help, right? Alexandra.
Yeah, absolutely. Draw that line, and then no one step out of it ever. And that's definitely how Darwinism works. That's how evolution occurs. Is everyone just behaves. Yeah. I was just thinking the other day, like when you're a kid and you start school and you're kicking and screaming and you're like, I don't want to go, and this is so scary and everything's terrible. Potentially, maybe you don't know that word when you're 4, but come the first grade of school the next year, I'm trying to think in universal terms about schooling here. It's not going to track, but like, let's say you're in first grade and you go back second grade. Imagine if your parents had said to you like, and you used to be so scared and you're a big dumb idiot because when you were 4, you were scared to go to school. And there's a chance that people's parents do say that. But the fact is that just because you were scared when you started school doesn't nullify the fact that you're not scared now because your mind's changed. And so this idea of like, don't say anything ever because in future it may not be relevant is just so ridiculous when you look at it that way. Because it's like, of course I would have been scared before I fucked around and found out, and now I'm not. That's how it goes. So I often find myself thinking, how timeless can I make what I'm saying? How accurate can I make it? How can I refine it so it's going to last throughout the ages and not get me in shit in future? And it's just so ridiculous to think that you would knock yourself back for something you said in the past when you only knew what you knew at the time. Yeah.
Well said. Absolutely.
And yeah, and I don't think that's reserved for childhood, right? Because you're going to keep fucking up anyway, so you may as well just do what you want and find out. And there will be consequences. There always is. So you're not devoid of responsibility just because you give yourself the freedom to say fuck it and try.
And the level of understanding that you're hoping to operate from can't happen until you make those mistakes. It's the funny part, right? You're like, I want to be perfect. Sorry, there's no way for you to do that without fucking up a whole bunch at all. So just embrace it, jump in there. But that said, intention. I'd say intention has so much to do with it, because if your intention is to just do it to the point where you are satisfied with what you're communicating, you'll find more often than not, there is some consistency there. And I say that from experience because, as everybody knows in our community, I have very little in the way of consistency in terms of I'm just all over the fucking place in terms of what I'm talking about. But if you go back and you look at my video from 2005 to now, although that sounds like two different people in some ways, it's the same point. It's coming from the same place, right? It's just expressed differently, using different words, different concepts, a different angle, a different me, right? That all has changed, right? But the underlying intention has remained. So yeah, you're always going to continue to grow and evolve. And I'll say right now, I'm still not very good at this. I'm pretty good. I'll admit, like, I'm pretty good in a situation with somebody or talking about something. I tend to be a little bit more on the empathetic side, the sensitive side, things like that. But there's still that hard shell. And there's still very much that hard edge in terms of like, get on it, and you could hear it a little bit earlier in this episode where I kind of called out everybody who hasn't joined the roundtable as yet and has access to it. Just saying, throwing that out there one more time. No shame, of course, but really, if not now, when?
And putting yourself in, even in expressing these types of things, because I've had people reach out to me or talk to me about how, I don't know, you guys seem to get deep with stuff. I don't know if I could keep up with the conversation. It's like, there's nothing to keep up with. We're talking about reality, experience. You have lots of experience doing lots of things. You have things to share inevitably, but despite that, we still get caught up in a degree of judgment for yourself, but that's like a part of the process too. And your ability to let go of that is part of it. Like an example I'm thinking of, I was talking with someone yesterday about, we got deeper into things and into God, religion. I'm trying to think where it started, what it started with. It started a little bit with the SVB bank collapse, like that whole process where how things like that are able to happen, the implications. And then we got into like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, the underlying mentality that's kind of driving everything. And we came to sort of agreements with things, which I found very interesting, because this person isn't necessarily very religious, but they still settle upon certain things. And we got into talking about God, and they were like, I don't know what God is, but it's something. And so kind of where I'm getting with this is the willingness to step into a conversation, because this was deeper than I had gone with this person in the past. And I was like, oh, we're going here. Okay, cool. And so they were like, I don't know what God is. And I was like, oh man, all right, this is part of me. Half of me was like, this is my chance. This is my opportunity to dig in. And then I tempered that a bit. They were like, well, God is everywhere. God is within me. And I was like, right there. You see that division right there? You're saying that God is everything and everywhere, but it's in you. You're still holding on to you. What are you exactly? And I was trying to be very inquisitive as opposed to presumptive with the conversation, and allow them to come to not conclusions, but maybe recognitions in themselves. And every time we got really close, they would kind of like skirt it. And then they started getting into the whole like, oh, well, there's a biological component. There's biological processes. When we started getting deeper into, division is merely a perception. Science has proven everything's made out of the same stuff. Division is very conceptual. And they started getting into, we're biological, like we need, we need to be in groups. It's how evolution has been processed, blah, blah, blah. And I was almost like, no, come back. You're veering off. You took the exit and we were going, it was smooth sailing. And then part of me was like, I really want to come back to where we're at. And so I tried a couple times, and then it kept like kind of bouncing off, and there was an unwillingness to do so. And they brought up, how religion provides people with the group component. And I was like, yeah, but the community aspect is awesome, but do you really think all of the narratives and beliefs are necessary? And they were like, well, no, but it's the best we've been able to come up with, that whole sort of thing. And it's like, okay, well, having all of those religions is still inherently divisive and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. But, if everyone is just able to keep to their religion, and I was like, yeah, but all the wars are from religions not believing the same thing. And they were like, yeah, but if we could just be, keep it and be better about it. And I was like, yeah, but, as long as there's some perception of division, there's inevitably going to be infinite iterations of that perception of division. And the division you perceive between you and God is going to perpetuate that. And so anyway, we just got into this whole sort of back and forth, in and out of it. And I came to a point where I was like, okay, we talked about a lot of stuff here. I feel like there was no progress made, but there was also. And so I was able, whereas like a year ago, I would have been getting frustrated. I would have been getting angry, and I was able to, there was a part of me that got a little bit worked up at one point. But for the most part was able to just keep it very light throughout. And towards the end, there's a part of me that very much was judging myself for thinking like, I couldn't quite do it. And so there was a letting go of that. So anyway, to bring it back to like the topic of conversation, being willing to step into situations and knowing if your intentions are there, if you're willing to have the conversation, that no matter what, as much as it seems like there isn't impacts being made, like knowing that there are. And so just being willing to step into the conversation, despite the person's, unwillingness to dive into certain topics, being able to do so is going to make ripples. And as much as it seems like, to me, it seemed at the end of that, like nothing went through. There was something, at least an inkling went through. And so it just reinforced to me the importance of being able to step in to a conversation and just keep that judgment of yourself out of it, knowing that something was done because something happened.
That's so very interesting, right? I've been through that experience. I've never looked at it quite the way I was just looking at it now, because you're right. You made an impact. Whatever the dent might be, a layer may not have come off, but you've added information that threatens the entire tree. And I think that's where the switch happens, is that we always talk about the fact that we're avoiding reality. Like we're avoiding what is here, now, you, uncertainty. That's all what is. And so we're running from that all the time. Big part of that, though, is responsibility. We run from that responsibility. And so we're always looking for people to give us more information that's going to help us. Like, just tell me what is. Tell me how the world works, would you? And so here you are saying, well, here's a few new things that you haven't seen yet, right? And they're picking it up. They're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden you come to a point where you're like, right. And here's another point that contradicts something you've already settled on that somebody else told you. And now there's this weird cognitive dissonance that happens. They're like, fuck, I got to change the whole tree. And so they go, well, which side has more believers, and they start looking at that pros and cons list. Well, the rest of the world says human nature is such and such, and you're saying right, but if you think about it on your own, you actually like just stop and think responsibly, you might find a different answer other than what you've been told and everybody else happens to agree with. And there's that level of responsibility. But that level of responsibility is the switch. It's if you're willing to be uncertain and question things from the ground up. This is where I think our knowledge really does get in our way. Krishnamurti was kind of saying this too, in terms of all of our libraries actually taking us farther and farther and farther away from the reality that we're trying to understand. Look at Darwin. Darwin went through a fucking shit ton of work and travel and research. He wrote books. He looked at different animals. He compared them to humans. He had insights where he's just like, holy fucking hell, there's a connection here. And he witnessed that recognition in a way that everybody else who just reads the theory of evolution does not, frankly, because they didn't work for it. In the same way that we don't witness the earth hurtling around the sun in the same way that Galileo did, because it took so much of his life and so much of his attention. And so it's almost like this memorized knowledge, which we just grasp for, gets in the way of the actual recognition that it's pointing to. And so I think that that's it, is we're always talking about making people feel like they're safe. And so I think you did the right thing. And I'll tell you right now, Andrew, you did it faster than I would have at your age, for sure. There's no way I would have backed off. I would have been just like, fucking get this. So if I could just word it the right way, if I could just bring it across the right way, right? Like none of that's true. None of that's true, because it's just giving them something else to follow. This is the problem we keep running into with people who are like, it's not just about telling people we're all one. And we keep saying, we're not telling people we're all one, but that's what they're hearing. And they're hearing it because they're looking for that concept to hold on to follow, instead of the underlying message that we've been pounding into everyone's head since the very beginning. You don't know. And everybody else may not even exist. Are you willing to have that responsibility? Are you willing to take it on yourself to understand for you based on your observations and your level of clarity? Because that's the only fucking game in town. And that is what uncertainty is all about, that responsibility. And I think that's the switch. I've just never thought of it that way. So thank you.
Yeah, I do think it comes down to that. And that always kind of eases my whatever emotions are arising, frustration. A lot of times when I get into the heat of those conversations, is that I can't get them to get this. I can't do it. It has to be through them and their willingness to look at it. And I always find it interesting because with this person in particular, they are pretty open-minded and willing to hear sides of things, but it's like to a point, and they almost use uncertainty as an excuse to not dive into things. I don't know if other people have experienced people like that. It's like, oh, I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. Like, yeah. It's like that's just like a shirking of responsibility, I think, because there's a discomfort that comes with recognizing how uncertain that is. Because you can say, well, I don't know, no one knows, but you've still settled upon like a trillion things that you don't realize you're settling upon that aren't actually as certain. And so I always just find it funny when people do that. And there was like, of course, like after the conversation, there's just a ton of stuff that I'm like, oh, there was this. Oh, at this point, I could have said this, and that would have been perfect. And it's like, no, it wouldn't have. It would have been the same kind of pushback, because it's not on you. You can't change anyone. You can offer different perspectives. You can share insights, but it's very much a two-way street. And I think understanding that has helped me a lot with these conversations. But I still forget sometimes. I still get worked up. I still get frustrated and start, like I was like fucking jumping around. We were on a walk and jumping around, kind of like, God, no, you're God. I said, you're God like 5 times in a row because they were so close. But again, it's not something you can convince someone of if they're not willing willing to hear it. There's always going to be that cognitive dissonance in the way.
Who are you trying to convince?
Exactly.
So we have about 9 minutes left of today's episode. I do want to give a quick shout out to everybody who has joined us on Patreon recently. We're up at 165 Patreon supporters right now. That's just incredible. And so we're so incredibly appreciative for the support. We are jumping ahead by leaps and bounds. We're already over 4,000 plays today, which is incredible for us. That's very much in the record of our daily traffic for sure. I think we've had like 2 days that were higher than that. So we're very excited, and it's all thanks to you. If you would like to join us after this, we're going to be chatting for another hour and a half, 2 hours, I think, something like that. It's a tier 2 call, so you can join us. It's $25 a month. You get access to us 5 days a week, as well as you get some merch, some stickers, some other stuff, some sweet discounts on our workshops, bunch of other things, retreat discounts as well. So definitely consider that. Patreon.com/Dualistic Unity. Before we wrap up here, I'm just going to pass it over to Mark and then Alexandra and just get their closing thoughts on today's conversation, because it's fun for me. Mark.
Gosh, I feel like I said so much already today. I don't know. I was really, just thinking about what Andrew was just talking about. Yeah, I kind of, I had to really, I often talk about my friends, and then also I was having some issues with my trainer for several weeks, and I really had a hard time with that one because, I actually had somebody reaching out for help, but just wasn't willing to look at, things that we could have looked at together. But I just had to let it go. I was taking it upon myself, like if I can't do something or add something to this person or bring them to a certain place, then that's something negative about me, or I failed this person, or I can't do this. And it took a few weeks for me to just realize, no, I haven't failed. He hasn't failed. It's just is what it is, and it's okay. I think I have to remind myself too that I think, as I mentioned earlier, everything is valid, every experience is valid, every perception is valid, everybody's place where they're at is fine. And I don't have to save everybody, because not everybody needs to be saved. It's just, the main thing that I can do is just be there. And if people offer what I have, if it serves anyone, that's great. If it doesn't, then I was still here and listened. I was present. And if anyone wants to talk more and is intrigued about something that I've said, I can't wait to talk to them. And otherwise I'm fine. And I had a really hard time in the last couple of weeks. I kept talking about it with one of the relationships I was in, really trying to get certain things hammered in and to really just bring somebody to a certain place, and it's just not possible. And you don't really want it to be, because it doesn't mean anything until you go through the work yourself. If that's where you're heading, it's just not going to be what it can be unless you get there, unless you go through the work and you go through whatever brought you there yourself. No one, even if someone could tell you and you'd be like, oh yeah, I see it, it's still not the same. And it's not a reflection of anything. It's just one of those things that has to be, if it is to be realized, it has to be realized. And and that's just it. I think that's enough. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Well said. I think that's well said. And again, thank you, Mark, for being here for today's roundtable. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. Again, anybody who's wondering, you'll see Mark in our groups. So feel free to, again, join us on Patreon. And now I'll pass it to Alexandra.
It's really just hit home this week that trying to impart with someone some wisdom or point of view, or, divorce them from their point of view, works on the assumption that you think you know what's best for them. And I realize that I've done that a lot, with the best of intentions, trying to save people all the time and trying to get them out of their own way. And ironically, by foisting my own understanding of what's best for them onto them, I actually was very conditional in my acceptance of them and my internal love of them. And I've realized now that if I had just accepted them for where they're at and what they were capable of, then I would have in effect been more loving and stopped trying to change them. And that could have really led to a far more loving dynamic between the two of us. And so all you can do is fuck around, and all you can do is find out. But I've just really appreciated this insight now that that I didn't necessarily know what was best for them just because I thought I did. And I certainly don't think I even had an effect on them in throughout that process to try and change their mind, but I did have an effect on my own experience. And I did limit my ability to appreciate them and accept them where they were at, because I thought their inability to take on my message had anything to do with me and had anything to do with my worth. And my inability to change them somehow rendered me devoid of efficacy, like I ever needed it in the first place. But I just realized now that I want to say I'm really sorry, but you can't be, because all you can do is your best. And I was definitely doing my best, but it's just nice to know that if you actually don't try and hammer that point home, and maybe you just accept the fact that that person's where they're at, and you only think you know what's best for them and it's not working. So maybe it's actually not. And you just appreciate things for where they're at, whether they're going in the direction you want them to or not. If you can appreciate each step along the way, you probably end up being a lot more loving of yourself and of them. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. I really appreciate Mark and Alexandra for both of you sharing everything you did on this episode, especially those closing thoughts, because I think anyone who begins to recognize that they aren't what they think they are run into this. They run into these situations where there's people in their life that, whether they're suffering or not, they're pushing back on these things. They're telling you to be a certain way or whatever. We get caught in these conversations, and because of the freedom that we start to experience in our own life, we want everyone to experience that freedom, and we want to inflict it on everyone. It's like, I feel so much more free. I want everyone to feel this free, but you can't. At the end of the day, all you can do is embody it in yourself, drop seeds where you can. And I think that ends up long term having so much more of an impact. But inevitably, I think almost everyone who begins to recognize these things gets caught up in that. I still get caught up in it all the time, trying to convince someone of something. Just if you could just see it the way I see it, you could be so much more free. And to Alexandra's point, that's settling upon a certainty, as if I fucking know what's best for them. And I never do. So there is a depth to uncertainty that just gets more and more free. There's like a freedom in knowing that you can't change anyone. And so you just kind of go about it. Fuck it. I'm going to say what I want. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to find out what happens. So this was a awesome conversation, awesome episode. I'm super excited to chat with everyone who is going to be on Patreon in about 15 minutes. And Mark, Alexandra, Ray, thank you so much for hopping on. Thank you to everyone on Twitch for tuning in, on YouTube, anyone who watches this or listens after the fact. It's been awesome, and we will talk to you soon.